The church doors did not simply open. They cracked against the stone like a shot, and every head in Cresswell Chapel turned as one to see a bride who was not the bride standing in the aisle in white satin finer than the dress Constance Ray had chosen for herself. She would remember, long after, that she had not been afraid. Not at first, not even then. Standing at the altar rail with Julian Farrow's ring already loose on her finger, one heartbeat from being made his wife. She would remember the color of the doors instead, a green gone the shade of pond water, and how the woman standing between them held a packet of letters tied in thread of that same green, as though she had dressed that morning to match a house that was about to be taken from her. Had Constance known what the next quarter hour would cost her, she would still have stood exactly where she stood, and let it happen in the light, because that was, in the end, the only place she had ever wanted the truth told. The woman in white did not run up the aisle. She walked it the way a bride walks it, slow, deliberate, letting the whole parish see her, and the whole parish, aunts, tenants, the vicar with his book still open to the vows, went still as one held breath. "I am sorry," the woman said, and her voice shook though her spine did not. "I was told I should come today. I was told it was time." Julian's hand found Constance's wrist before it found anything else, and she felt, under his fingers, the one thing his face would not show her, that he knew this woman, and had known she was coming, though not, perhaps, that she would come like this. He did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. "Thora," he said, and the name landed in the chapel like a stone dropped into a still pond, ring after ring of murmur spreading outward from it. Not here. Where then, Thora lifted the packet of letters as though it weighed nothing, though her arm trembled with the effort of holding it steady. "You wrote that you would settle everything before the summer was out. You wrote that I should trust you a little longer. I have trusted you a great deal longer than that, my lord, and here is the summer, gone." The vicar closed his book without meaning to. The small sound of it was very loud. Constance did not look at the letters. She looked at Julian's face, which had gone the particular stillness of a man taking a blow without letting it report itself, and she understood, in the space of that stillness, that whatever this was, he was not going to explain it here. In front of his tenants and his aunt and the boy who held the horses, and that no amount of her asking would move him. She had kept his books for the better part of a year. She knew a column that would not balance when she saw one, and she was looking at one now. A man who loved her. She still believed, even then, that he loved her, refusing to spend a single word in his own defense. "Constance," he said, low, only for her. "Give me until tonight." "You have had a year," she said, not unkindly, and that was the worst of it, that there was no anger in her voice at all, only the flat arithmetic of a debt come due. She drew the ring from her finger. His ring, new, the metal not yet warmed fully to her hand, and she crossed the small space between the altar rail and the woman in white, and she set it into Thora Bell's open palm, folding the girl's cold fingers closed around it herself, the way one closes a ledger that will not be opened again that day. "It was never truly mine to keep," she said, "if it was always meant for someone I've never been introduced to." Then she walked back down the aisle alone, past the pews of people who did not know where to look, out through the green doors into a heat that pressed on the churchyard like a hand laid flat, and she did not cry until she was well past the lich gate, where no one important could see her do it. It was Nan Twill, waiting with the carriage because some old instinct had told her not to trust a wedding day that arrived too easily, who said the thing that mattered most. Once Constance was inside, and the door was shut, and the horses were moving. 17 days, Nan said, not unkindly either. That's what's left before his 30th birthday, and by his father's will he's to be married before it, or the whole estate goes into Edmund Marsh's keeping. Trustee and steward and lord of it all but in name. Whatever that girl in white wants, Julian Farrow cannot afford to let this stand unmended for long. Whether you'll be there to see it mended is another sum entirely, and only you can do that arithmetic, my girl." Constance said nothing. She only watched Cresswell Park recede through the carriage window, its chimneys pale against a sky gone white with heat, and thought that she had never in her life balanced a book by walking away from it, and did not know, yet, whether this would prove the exception. 3 months earlier, none of it would have seemed possible, because 3 months earlier Constance Ray had been nothing more than the plain, quick-fingered daughter of a disgraced clerk, kept on sufferance as companion and bookkeeper to Julian's aunt, old Lady Pruitt, who liked her precisely because she never simpered and never asked for anything twice. Constance's father had been a solicitor's clerk of excellent hand and better character, until the year she turned 16, when he had been dismissed from Cresswell's own affairs for discrepancies no one troubled to explain to him, and had died 3 winters later still protesting his innocence to a room that had stopped listening. She had learned bookkeeping at his knee before she understood it was training for poverty rather than for love of the thing itself, and she had learned, more usefully, to read a page the way other women read a face, to see where an entry had been altered, where a hand had tried too hard to imitate itself, where a sum had been made to lie without ever technically stating an untruth. It was this second skill, not the first, that brought her into Julian Farrow's study on an ordinary Tuesday in April, holding the Westwood Cottage accounts open to a page she had read 4 times because she did not trust what it told her. "My lord," she said, "I believe your steward has entered the same repair to the mill race twice, 11 months apart, at 2 different sums." Julian looked up from his own ledger with the particular attention of a man unused to being corrected and unwilling to resent it. "Show me." She did, laying the pages side by side the way her father had taught her, tracing the discrepancy with one ink-stained finger while he leaned close enough that she caught the smell of him. Wood smoke. Leather. Horse. A man who worked his own fences, though his rank did not require it. "You have a gift for this," he said finally. "My father had it first," she said. "It cost him everything he owned, in the end, so I try not to call it a gift where he can hear me." Something in his face changed then, some door opening a crack. "I should like you to look over the whole estate," he said. "Properly, paid properly, not as a favor to my aunt. And if I find worse than a mill race counted twice? Then I should like to know that most of all. It was not romance, not yet. It was a bargain struck on stated terms, feelings disclaimed on both sides, and Nan Twill, when Constance told her of it that night over cold mutton in her small rented room, only sniffed and said that any man who paid a woman properly for her mind was already halfway to losing his heart to the rest of her, whether he knew it or not, and that Constance had better decide now whether she wanted to be found. "I want to be paid," Constance said. "That is a beginning," said Nan, "and beginnings are the only part of a story anyone gets to choose." Cordelia Marsh came to Cresswell for the first time that Constance witnessed on a hot morning in May. Gloved hands folded, gray silk so precisely fitted it seemed less worn than built around her, and she was, everyone agreed, the loveliest woman to enter that house in a decade, and the gentlest spoken. "You must be the little bookkeeper," she said to Constance in the drawing room, in a voice pitched for kindness and honed for something else entirely. "Julian speaks of you as though you were a prize horse he'd found in a field. I do hope you know how to take a compliment shaped like that." "I know how to read a column, Mrs. Marsh," Constance said. "I find it teaches a person not to mind much what shape a compliment comes in." Cordelia's smile did not move, but her gloved fingers smoothed themselves, finger by finger, a small private habit Constance would come to know very well before the year was out. "How practical you are," she said. "Edmund says practical women are the only sort worth trusting near money. I confess I have never had the stomach for figures myself. I only know what leaves my hand and what does not come back." She said it lightly, laughing at her own joke, and the room laughed with her, and no one but Constance seemed to hear the small, cold seriousness sitting underneath the laughter like a stone under still water. Word of the growing arrangement between the Earl and his aunt's plain companion spread through the county the way such word always spreads, in murmurs at card tables and wagers in servants' halls, and most of it was unkind in the ordinary way gossip is unkind to women without fortune. But Constance had grown a good hide over the years and did not trouble herself with it. What she troubled herself with, quietly, in the weeks that followed, was the Westwood Cottage entry, which kept recurring in Julian's private accounts, not the estate's, but his own. A separate purse he kept and managed himself, careless of exactly the kind of scrutiny Constance could not help but apply to any page set before her. Sums went out monthly to a cottage in the West Wood, entered only as maintenance, no tenant named, no purpose given, and once, in his own hand, a note in the margin so small she nearly missed it, for tea, and see her kept safe. She copied nothing. She said nothing. She only filed the shape of it away, the way her father had taught her to file away every column that did not yet make sense, on the theory that arithmetic, given time, always tells the truth eventually, whether or not anyone wants to hear it. It was in June, over a candle burned down to its last inch and 2 ledgers spread between them on the estate office table, that Julian first came close to telling her. They had fallen into the habit of working late together, an intimacy built entirely of ink and tallow smoke and the particular ease of 2 competent people solving a problem side by side, and Constance had learned the shape of his hands well enough by then to know when they were steady and when they were not. That night, they were not steady. "There is a debt on this estate," he said, "that predates my father's death, and a person connected to it whom I am bound to protect, and I cannot yet tell you the whole of it. Cannot, or will not. Both," he said, honest, at least in that. "I have made a promise, Constance, and it is not mine alone to break. I ask you to trust that it will not touch you." "Debts touch everyone eventually," she said. "That is rather the nature of them." He almost smiled then. The ghost of it, the first she had ever seen cross his face uninvited, and said, "You sound like your father." "My father is the reason I know what happens to people who are kept in the dark about a debt that is in fact theirs." He reached across the table and closed his hand over hers, not asking permission. And she let him, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, the candle guttering low. A wren somewhere outside beginning, absurdly, to sing though the hour was well past dark. "I will tell you before I ask you to marry me," he said. "See that you do," she said, "because I do not marry blind men, my lord, and I do not intend to become one myself." It was, she would think later, the closest thing to a vow either of them made that summer, and it was the one neither of them kept. The blow came at the end of July, at Lady Pruitt's card party, delivered so gently that half the room mistook it for sympathy. Cordelia leaned close to Constance over the tea things and said, "You are a sensible girl, so I shall be plain with you, out of kindness, because no one else will be." Julian rides out to the West Wood twice a week and has done for above a year. There is a cottage there, and a woman in it, and money that goes to her every quarter that appears nowhere in the estate's public accounts, only, I am told, in his own private hand. Constance's cup did not so much as tremble. "I keep those accounts, Mrs. Marsh. I have seen the entry. Have you?" Cordelia's eyes were very soft, very sorry. "Then you will have seen, too, how neatly the sums match what you yourself are paid to look the other way about. I do not say you take a bribe, my dear. I only say that a clever woman knows which columns it is wisest not to add all the way to the bottom." The suggestion landed exactly where it was aimed, not on Constance's honesty, but on her competence, the one thing she had built her whole self around since her father's ruin, and for one terrible instant she doubted her own reading of the page, the way a person doubts a familiar word stared at too long. By evening the story had traveled the length of the county in its ugliest shape, that the Earl's plain little bookkeeper was paid, in part to keep his mistress's accounts hidden inside her own. Julian found her in the estate office past midnight, still sitting before the ledgers, though she had long since stopped seeing the figures on the page, and when he tried to take her hand, she drew it back. "Is there a woman in the West Wood?" "Yes. Do you love her?" "Not as you mean." "Then, tell me who she is, Julian, tonight, or I will believe every unkind word said of me today, and think I have earned every one of them by trusting a man who will not trust me back." He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him choose, watched the choice cost him something visible in the set of his jaw, and still he said, "I cannot." "Not yet. I gave my word before I ever gave you mine, and I will not break the older promise to keep the newer one comfortable." "Then you have already chosen," she said, and left him standing alone among the ledgers. Edmund Marsh came to her 3 days later in Cordelia's drawing room with an offer dressed as kindness, a small annuity, quietly arranged, sufficient to remove her and her father's memory both from Cresswell's gossip forever, if she would simply write to Julian breaking the engagement of her own accord, sparing everyone, as he put it, the unpleasantness of a public unraveling. "You would be doing him a mercy," Edmund said. "A man in his position cannot marry a woman half the county already whispers took money to look away from his affairs. Better it end now, quietly, with your name still your own." Constance sat very still, hands folded the way she had learned to fold them under her father's disgrace, and said, "You are offering to pay me to disappear. I am offering to pay you to be sensible. I keep my accounts honestly, Miss Marsh. I'll not begin elsewhere, and certainly not for your money." She left the annuity untouched on the table between them, and word of her refusal reached Julian before she did, and when she came upon him that evening in the stable yard, sleeves rolled, hands raw from mending a fence rail himself, as he always did when a thing in him needed doing rather than merely thinking, he looked at her the way a man looks at ground he had thought already lost. "They told me you refused Edmund's money." "I did." "Why? Because I have already lost everything a man's money can replace," she said, "and I am not about to sell the one thing it cannot, knowing my own name was never for sale." He crossed the yard and, for once, did not reach for her hand first, only stood close enough that she could hear him breathing, and said, "Lo, I am asking you to marry me still. On the date already set. I know I have given you every reason to say no. You have given me exactly one reason," she said, "and it is the same reason each time. You will not tell me who she is." "I cannot," he said again, and this time his voice broke on the word in a way it never had before, "because if I tell you before it is safe to tell, I may cost her her life, Constance, not merely her comfort. That is the whole of my silence. It has never been about not trusting you." She studied his face a long moment in the fading light, and found there, for the first time, not evasion, but genuine fear, and something in her, some old stubborn faith her father's ruin had never quite managed to kill, decided to trust the fear, if not yet the whole of the silence around it. Then marry me, she said, and finish protecting her, and tell me the moment it is safe, and not one day later. It was this fragile, half-blind bargain that carried them both, 3 weeks on, to the green doors of Cresswell Chapel, where a woman in bridal white was waiting to prove that even a bargain made in good faith can still be built on ground neither party has finished surveying. Standing again at that altar rail in memory's returning light, Constance understood now what she had not let herself see in the moment itself, that Thorabel's fear had not been the fear of a discovered mistress, but the fear of a girl who had been told, by someone she trusted, that this was the only way left to save the man she believed loved her. Thora had not looked at Julian the way a woman looks at a lover exposed. She had looked at him the way a drowning person looks at the one person who taught her to swim and then vanished. That detail nagged at Constance the whole carriage ride home, worrying at her the way an unbalanced column always did, refusing to let her rest even in her own grief. It was nearly midnight when Nan brought up the stairs a boy she did not know, thin, ink-stained about the fingers in a way Constance recognized at once as a fellow clerk's hands, standing in the doorway turning his cap over and over. "Begging pardon, Miss," he said, "I'm Simeon Cray. I keep Mrs. Marsh's private correspondence, and I think, Miss, I think I've done a wickedness I didn't understand the shape of till today, watching that girl walk up the aisle in a dress Mrs. Marsh bought her herself." Constance set down her tea very carefully, the way one sets down anything that might, in an instant, shatter everything within reach of it. "Sit down, Mr. Cray," she said, "and tell me every word you know, from the beginning, and leave nothing out for my comfort, because my comfort is no longer what matters here." Outside, thunder was beginning to gather far off over the wolds, the first real break in the summer's long, pressing heat, and Nan lit a second candle without being asked, because some conversations, she had long since learned, are better held in more light than less. Simeon's account, delivered in fits and starts over the better part of an hour, laid the whole architecture of the deception bare in a way no single document could have. Thora Bell, he said, was no mistress at all, but the late Earl's daughter by a woman named Bell, who had once kept house at Cresswell, borne the wrong side of a marriage line, and hidden away out of a dead man's shame rather than his malice, her keep quietly funded first by the old Earl, and then, after his death, by Julian, who visited her not as a lover, but as the brother he had been raised. In secret. To be, Cordelia Marsh had known of Thora for years, had known, in fact, since girlhood, when she and Julian's father had first arranged the cottage in the West Wood, and had used that knowledge first to bleed the estate's private purse for her husband's debts under cover of Thora's maintenance, and lately, with the Earl's 30th birthday closing in, and a marriage threatening to close her access to the estate for good, to end the engagement outright by turning Julian's oldest secret into his ugliest scandal. The letters Thora carried, Simeon swore, were none of them Julian's true hand, Cordelia had taught herself, over years of intercepting his correspondence as his aunt's unofficial secretary, to copy it well enough to fool a girl who had only ever seen his writing on the outside of a monthly bank draft. "She had me carry the last of them," Simeon said, twisting his cap until the brim threatened to tear, "and told the poor girl her ladyship, meaning herself, though she's no ladyship at all by right, told her the wedding would be stopped, whatever it cost, and that if she loved his lordship truly she'd stand up in that church and claim what was promised her, or lose him to another woman by nightfall. I didn't know till I saw her face in that white dress that Mrs. Marsh had told her a kindness was a cruelty. I've been carrying that girl's letters like carrying coals I thought were cold." Constance sat with the whole shape of it a long moment, feeling it settle into place the way a column finally settles once the one hidden error is found, and said, quietly, "Mr. Cray, did you ever, in all your carrying, see his lordship's private mark, the small wren he presses into wax on any letter meant only for family?" Simeon frowned. "I've heard of it. Never saw it used on aught Mrs. Marsh gave me to carry." "Then we have our proof," Constance said. "If we can get it in front of witnesses who matter, and get you to say aloud what you have just said to me, without flinching, in a room that will not let Mrs. Marsh soften it afterward." Thunder cracked again, nearer now, and Nan, watching the two of them lean together over the candle exactly as Constance and Julian once had over a ledger, said only, "There it is. There's the arithmetic, my girl. Now go and show your work." Julian met her at the estate office door before dawn, having ridden through the last of the storm to reach her the moment her note arrived, mud to the knee and his hair plastered flat. And when she told him what Simeon had confessed, his face went through grief and fury and, last of all, a kind of shamed relief so raw she nearly reached for him before she remembered she had given his ring away not. 2 days passed. "I should have told you everything the day I met you," he said. "I told myself I was protecting Thora. I was also protecting myself from ever having to say aloud how badly my own family failed her." "Then say it now," Constance said. "Not to me. To Josiah Pell, and to your tenants, and to whoever Edmund Marsh has been counting on to inherit your silence along with your estate. We have 17 days become 14, my lord, and I do not intend to spend them comforting you privately when the whole county needs to hear this publicly." It was, in its way, a proposal of a different kind, not of marriage but of method, and Julian, who had spent a year learning to love a woman who would not let a single figure stand unexamined, accepted it as readily as he would, 3 weeks hence, accept the other. Josiah Pell, trustee of the Farrow estate since the old earl's death, and a man whose good opinion of himself rested chiefly on never having been wrong in 30 years of practice, agreed to convene a formal hearing within the week. Not a court, for no crime had yet been proven, but a reckoning of accounts before the family's principal tenants, solicitors, and connections, at which Edmund Marsh, still hoping to see the trusteeship fall to him by Michaelmas default, could hardly refuse to appear without appearing to fear it. Thora, found by Constance herself at the Westwood cottage 2 days later, wept for the better part of an hour before she could speak at all, ashamed past bearing at what she had done, and Constance, who understood better than most what it was to be used as a weapon by someone who called it kindness, held the girl's hands the way she wished someone had once held her father's, and said only, "You were lied to by someone practiced at it." That is not the same as lying. Simeon, coaxed and steadied by Nan's blunt insistence that a man who confesses freely sleeps a great deal better than one dragged to it, agreed to speak before the assembly, though his hands, Constance noted, did not stop shaking until the morning of the hearing itself. What remained was the last piece, the one Constance had saved without quite admitting to herself she was saving it, a sample of Cordelia's true, unguarded hand, taken from an old household order Simeon still possessed, to be laid beside the forged letters where every eye in the room could see, for itself, what a copied signature always eventually confesses. The hearing was held in the long gallery at Cresswell, doors thrown open against a morning washed clean by the night's storm, light coming low and gold across the floor, in a way that made even old portraits look freshly painted, and every chair Josiah Pell had ordered set out was filled well before the appointed hour. Cordelia arrived in gray, composed, gloved, seating herself beside Edmund with the unhurried grace of a woman who has decided in advance that nothing said here can touch her. Thora sat near the back, Nan's arm firm around her shoulders. Julian stood, rather than sat, Near the great table where Josiah Pell had laid out, in careful rows, the documents Constance had spent 3 sleepless nights assembling. "We are gathered," Pell began, "to examine certain matters touching the character and conduct of persons connected with this house, at the Earl's own request, in advance of his 30th birthday and the provisions attaching to it." He looked to Julian. "You may begin, my lord." Julian did not. "My future wife has done the work," he said. "Let her present it." A murmur went through the gallery at that, of surprise more than disapproval, and Constance rose and crossed to the table, feeling every eye in the room settle on her the way ledger eyes had once settled on her father, and finding, this time, that she did not flinch from it. "I keep this family's accounts," she said. "And accounts, examined closely enough, do not know how to lie, whatever the people behind them may wish. I should like to begin with a packet of letters presented 3 days ago as evidence of his lordship's affections elsewhere." She laid the letters out, one by one, beside a single genuine note in Julian's hand, borrowed for the purpose from his aunt's own correspondence. "His lordship marks every letter intended for family with this," she held up, for the room to see, a small brass seal worked in the shape of a wren. "It appears on the genuine note. It appears nowhere on these." A ripple went through the gallery, low, disbelieving. Cordelia's gloved hands smoothed themselves, finger by finger, and she said, mild as milk, "A man forgets his own habits when his heart is elsewhere, Miss Ray." "That proves nothing but carelessness." "Then perhaps Mr. Cray can help us with the rest," Constance said, and Simeon rose from his chair as though rising to his own hanging, and in a voice that shook only for the first sentence and steadied thereafter, told the room precisely what he had told Constance 3 nights before, who had taught him to imitate a household hand, who had told him what to carry and to whom, and whose voice had instructed him, not 4 days past, to deliver a certain white dress to a certain cottage in the West Wood. "One question, Mr. Cray," Josiah Pell said, leaning forward at last, his self-satisfaction visibly cracking under the weight of what he was hearing. "Who paid you?" "Mrs. Marsh," Simeon said, and did not look away from her as he said it. "Every quarter, out of moneys she told me, came from the estate's maintenance purse for the Westwood cottage. I never once saw a farthing of it reach the cottage itself." The silence that followed was total enough that the birdsong outside the open doors seemed suddenly very loud, one wren, absurdly, singing on in the ivy as though the room's business were no concern of his. Cordelia's composure, held so long and so beautifully, went at last, not into weeping, but into something quieter and worse, a stillness that Constance, watching closely, recognized as the particular stillness of someone finally too tired to keep performing. "You want to know why," Cordelia said, to no one and everyone. "I loved this house before I loved anything in it. I was raised half in it and given none of it, married off to a man with debts because my own father thought a cousin's affection was inheritance enough. I have spent 11 years watching Julian Farrow inherit everything I was taught to want and never permitted to have, and when the old Earl's clerk began asking questions about a certain cottage's accounts years ago, I let him take the blame rather than let it fall on me. Because I told myself then, as I have told myself since, that I had earned this house more than any of you." The gallery had gone entirely still. Constance felt the floor of her own composure shift beneath the words, "the old Earl's clerk," and understood, with a clarity that arrived like cold water, that she was hearing, at last, the true account of her father's ruin. "My father," she said, and her voice did not shake, though everything in her wanted it to. "You mean my father." Cordelia looked at her properly for the first time that morning, and something that might almost have been remorse crossed her face before she mastered it. Thomas Ray, she said. Yes, he found the first of it, years before you ever set foot in this house, Miss Ray, and I could not afford to let him be believed. Josiah Pell, to his credit, did not let the moment collapse into private grief. He simply set the last document on the table, an old household order in Cordelia's own unguarded hand, procured by Simeon, laid beside the earliest forged entry from Thomas Ray's dismissed accounts, and said, gently but without softening, the hand matches. It has always matched. I am sorry, Miss Ray, that it took 11 years and your own courage to prove what should have been proven then. Julian, watching Cordelia now with a grief that had nothing performed in it, said, quiet enough that the whole gallery had to lean in to catch it, you were my father's ward. I loved you as a sister, whatever else you believed of me. I will not have you tried, and I will not have you shamed further before these people. But you will leave Cresswell within the week, on an allowance sufficient to live honestly and never enough to steal from again, and Edmund's claim on this trusteeship dies with your leaving it. That is not mercy for what you did. It is protection for everyone you might yet do it to. Cordelia rose, gathered what remained of her composure like a woman gathering a torn hem, and left the gallery without another word, and no one in the room. Constance noticed, looked at her going with anything so simple as triumph, only the particular sorrow reserved for someone who might, in another arrangement of fortune, have been loved rightly instead. The gallery did not empty quickly after Cordelia had gone. Grief, once let into a room, tends to linger and rearrange the furniture of everyone present, and it was some while before the ordinary business of living resumed its claim on the day. Josiah Pell, moved in a manner he would later insist was merely procedural, struck from the estate's old dismissal records the 11-year-old note against Thomas Ray's name, and had a fresh page drawn up in the Solicitors' Guild Register affirming, for whatever such a thing was worth to a dead man, that no discrepancy had ever been proven against him, and that the fault lay elsewhere entire. Constance stood a long while before that fresh page once it was brought to her, running one ink-stained finger along the clean new entry the way she had once run it along her father's ruined one, and found that grief, honestly discharged, weighs rather less than grief left owing. Thora, still pale from the morning's revelations, was drawn at last into the center of the gallery by Julian himself, who took her hand before the whole assembly and said, plainly, that this was his sister, acknowledged now and always, and that any account still owed to her, of shelter, of name, of the years she had spent hidden for other people's comfort, would be settled openly from that day forward. Miss Araminta Hale, who had spent the better part of the season allowing Cordelia to angle her gently toward Julian's notice as a more suitable match than a penniless bookkeeper, rose from her own chair with the particular grace of a woman choosing honesty over pride, and said to the room at large that she had believed certain things told her in confidence that she now understood to have been lies dressed as friendship, and that she withdrew, gladly and without grievance, from any claim she had never truly wished to press. Simeon Cray, released from Cordelia's service and half expecting dismissal from the county entirely, was offered instead a clerk's place in Josiah Pell's own office, on the trustee's own dry observation that a man who confesses a wrong unprompted is worth 10 who never make one at all. Edmund Marsh, his trusteeship dissolved along with his wife's scheme, was left to settle his own debts as best he could, and left Cresswell that same week without ceremony or farewell, which surprised no one. Julian found Constance at last near the long gallery's open doors, where the storm-washed light still lay gold across the floor, and did not reach for her hand this time either, only stood beside her and said, I have no ring to offer you. I understand entirely if you would rather I found a new one before I ask again. Ask anyway, she said. I find I have grown fond of unfinished business. He turned to face her properly then, and something in his voice, when he spoke, had none of the careful management of secrets left in it at all. Marry me because you wish it, he said, not because a birthday is 14 days off, not because a scandal wants mending, not because any account anywhere requires balancing. It is the only coin I will take from you now, Constance. I have spent a year learning that every other kind costs too much. She looked at him a long moment, weighing the offer the way she weighed any figure set before her, and found, for once in her life, that it required no checking at all. Then yes, she said, freely, and for no reason better than that I wish it, and the wren in the ivy outside, as if it had been waiting for its cue the whole long morning, began again to sing. They were married in September, quietly, in the same green-doored chapel, though this time the doors stayed shut through the whole of the service and opened only afterward, onto a churchyard gone gold and amber with the turning season, rather than white with summer heat. There was no crowd of curious county eyes this time, only family properly claimed, Thora in a plain blue gown of her own choosing, weeping happily through the whole of the vows, Nan Twill weeping rather less happily and rather more loudly, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief she claimed had merely gotten dust in it, Josiah Pell standing witness with the solemn satisfaction of a man who had, in the end, been proven right about something after all. The wedding breakfast was small, the wedding itself smaller still, and Constance thought, watching Julian's raw, working hands turn her new ring once around her finger to be sure of the fit, that she had never in her life seen an account settled so completely and so gently in the same hour. In the months that followed, Cresswell's ledgers were audited top to bottom under Constance's own hand, properly, at last, publicly credited, and every discrepancy dating back 11 years was traced, corrected, and closed, her father's name entered fresh and clean into the Solicitors' Guild rolls where it should always have stood. Thora, given at last a household and a name of her own within the family, rather than hidden beyond its edge, found in time a quiet understanding with a widowed neighboring squire who valued her steadiness above her history, and was married herself the following spring in a dress she chose entirely alone. Cordelia Marsh, from the small cottage in a distant county where her allowance kept her modestly, wrote once a year at Christmas, brief, unanswered, but never unread. And Julian kept every letter in a drawer he did not open often, but never once considered emptying. Araminta Hale married well within the year, happily, to a man who had never needed anyone's ruin to recommend himself to her. It was the following June, nearly a year to the day since the wedding that had never quite happened, that Constance stood once more at the open doors of Cresswell Chapel, this time watching from the front pew rather than the aisle, as Thora was given away by her own brother in a service that filled every seat and spilled out onto the green beyond. The doors stood open the whole while, morning light pouring through them exactly as it had the day everything nearly broke, and when Julian slipped into the pew beside his wife afterward, his hand finding hers the way it always did now, easily, without asking, he leaned close and said, for her ear only, the very words she had once set into a stranger's palm, along with a ring that was never truly lost, only misdirected for a season. It was always meant for you. I only needed the whole county to help me prove the arithmetic. Somewhere in the ivy above the green doors, a wren began, as it always seemed to, exactly on cue, to sing. If this story warmed you, if you found yourself holding your breath the moment those doors cracked open, wondering whether love could survive being so badly misread, then come sit a while longer by this fire with me. I keep the kettle on and a chair kept empty for anyone who still believes the truth is worth waiting for, however long the reckoning takes. Tell me, in the comments, which moment stayed with you longest, the ring pressed into a stranger's hand, or the wren singing its way back into the last scene. And if you'd like more evenings like this one, consider staying close by subscribing. It costs nothing, and it keeps a place warm for you here every time a new story is told. Until then, be patient with the ones who go quiet to protect you, and gentler still with the ones who never got to explain themselves in time. Sleep well and keep your own accounts honestly kept.